Okay, good morning, Year 7. Pleased to see you. I'll be doing the assembly today instead of introducing someone else. Here we are, right at the beginning of a new year, in our first full week back, and we don't know quite what this year will bring. Hopefully you'll be able to influence pretty much most of the things that happen to you this year, but some things will happen and you just have to react to and make the best of them. Over the New Year holiday and Christmas holiday, particularly around New Year, you get a lot of TV programs that look back on the old year and all the things that have happened. And they're compilations of things that have happened perhaps in the news or in the media and so on. And I'm sure some of you will have seen those. And often you see this image up there at New Year of old Father Time, who represents the old year that's leaving with his long grey beard and his sharp scythe that represents death and reaping, and also his egg timer that represents the sands of time slowly dripping away. And usually Father Time is quite a depressing figure as he shuffles out, and he's replaced by the new year, which is often represented as a baby, something of kind of youthfulness and hope and positivity. And interestingly, if any of you did watch any of those compilation programs over the holidays, you may have noticed, particularly in social media, that a lot of people were taking a very negative view of 2016. A lot of people were looking back on the negative things that happened, and many people were very happy to see the back of 2016. And that's certainly one way of looking at it, but it is quite a pessimistic, negative way of looking at things. So these assemblies are here to inspire you. The whole point of these assemblies is so that you learn things or learn about people that you may not know about before, and you get an idea of what certain people have done in their lives that you might choose to do or pursue some of the things that they did in your life. And I'm going to talk to you today about one particular person, a British person, who, when she was younger and still at school, she wrote a lot of diaries, and she was very determined in what she wanted to do. She didn't quite know exactly what she wanted to do when she was at school, but she knew she wanted to do this. She said, I'm going to do something useful, something for people. And that person I'm going to speak to you today about is a lady called Edith Cavell. And I'd be very surprised if many or any people in this room actually know who Edith Cavell is or was. So I'll talk to you about her today. Edith Cavell was born in 1865. Just over 150 years ago, 152 years ago. And Edith was born to a family in Norfolk, in the east of England. And if you look at that photo just behind me, Edith is standing on the right with her mum and a younger sister who was about 1.5 at the time. So that was an early photo of Edith. She lived and was born in Norfolk, in the east, where some of you may well have been on holiday. There's holiday resorts there, Great Yarmouth, Cromer, Sheringham. They've got some good beaches there, and some of you may well have been to Norfolk before. And it's quite a rural place, and where she grew up was in a village called Swardston. And there's a painting there of the church in Swardston, and it played an important part in her life, in Edith Cavell's life, because that's where her father worked. And her father was the vicar for the local community. And he looked after the parish, and he helped people and supported them with their faith. And if they were having difficulties or difficult times or needed some help or guidance, then he was also there as the vicar for the community. And that's the church where her father worked. Interestingly, Edith painted that when she was still at school. She did have a talent for painting and a particular interest in art and drawing and being creative. But that's not what she became famous for. So she painted that before she left school. And often, when she had free time, she'd be doing sketches, and these are some of the sketches that she did. She did little drawings in pen and ink on postcards, and she got a lot of pleasure from drawing and exercising these skills. She didn't go on to get a profession using these, but she really enjoyed being creative and using her artwork. But as I said, that's not what she became famous for. She did reasonably well at school, and when she left school, Edith Cavell became a governess. Now, a governess is quite an old-fashioned word and an old-fashioned profession, but essentially it's a nanny. It's someone who would be employed to go and work in childcare and work for usually rich families and to look after their children. And that is a photo of Edith there when she started work as a governess. And if you look closely, you'll see that the uniform she's wearing is very much like that of a nurse. And governesses focused on looking after younger children, giving them an early education, but once they were old enough to go to school, then a teacher would take over. And Edith Cavell particularly enjoyed working as a governess, and she worked for a number of families throughout England and throughout Europe, and she got to travel. She went to France, Switzerland, Austria, Germany, and in her early 20s, she got to visit a number of different places and look after a number of different children. And she found that she also, like her dad, really enjoyed working with people and looking after them. But throughout her 20s, she wasn't settled, and she decided, I don't actually want to do this for a living. So she changed, and at the age of 30, which you may think is quite old, I think is actually quite young, at the age of 30, she decided to change her job, and she trained to become a nurse. And that took quite a bit of training, even that many years ago. And she qualified as a nurse, and she worked in hospitals in London, in Maidstone, in Kent, and also in Manchester. So she got good experience working at different hospitals. And she was working when there was a terrible typhoid outbreak in this country. And typhoid was a particularly bad disease where many thousands of people died in an epidemic. And nurses like Edith Cavell worked with those that were ill and dying, and they nursed those as they died, or they nursed many as they recovered. And she was very brave, like many nurses in her time, working with these sick people. And she, like a number of other nurses, received a medal. That's the Maidstone medal that she was awarded for her hard work with those seriously ill people. But again, that's not what she became famous for. In her early work as a nurse, it became recognized that she had a particular skill. She was good at what she did, but she was also good at conveying the skills to other people, at teaching. So Edith was invited to lead a new college of nursing training that was opening up in Belgium. And if you look on that map behind me, you'll see Belgium, written in bold letters, over on the continent of Europe, just to the right and just to the left of that medal. So she left this country, she left England, to pursue her career and her interest in looking after people as a nurse and training a new generation of nurses in those skills. That's a picture of Edith Cavell there with her dogs just after she'd settled into her new home in Belgium. She was in her 30s now, and she recognised in the diary that she wrote that this really was her vocation. It's what she wanted to do. Not just to nurse and help people, but to pass on those skills to another generation, so that the people she trained could go on and help many, many more people. And she spent time setting up this brand new nursing college, teaching the nurses how to run a ward, how to treat patients, and particular standards that they needed to follow in terms of health and distributing medicine, and also care. And she really, really excelled at this, and she recruited more people to come and train as nurses, and it became very, very popular and successful. And in the middle there, you'll see a picture of Edith Cavell in her darker dress. And she was very well respected by those that trained with her. She did a great job, and the number of people in the nursing profession increased significantly. And the people in Belgium were really, really pleased with her. Things were going really, really well. And then something quite disastrous happened that didn't just affect her, but it affected everyone in Europe at that time. And as many of you will know, the First World War broke out. And when that happened, Belgium, the country that Edith Cavell was working in, was occupied by the German army. It was taken over by a foreign country, and it was very different and quite frightening. And the war raged on in Europe, and as you know, many, many hundreds of thousands of people died. In fact, millions, I believe. And her nurse her hospital had to change. It became a Red Cross hospital. And if you think back to an assembly that Mr. McEwen did a few months back, he talked about the work of the Red Cross. The Red Cross and the Red Crescent operate by looking after anyone. Whatever country you're from, whatever side you might be fighting on in a war, they look after anyone if they're sick or injured. And Edith Cavell led her hospital into becoming a Red Cross hospital and treating soldiers, whether they were German, French, British, whatever, they treated them the same, and they nursed them back to recovery, or they nursed them as they died. And she did really well at that. She was really well respected, and she saved many lives. But that isn't really what she became famous for. In 1914, she became aware of this underground network that was operating. And it was a British network, and it was a group of people who were determined to help captured British soldiers escape from their capture and travel back through Europe at great risk to themselves and at great risk to Edith Cavell to get across the Channel and back to England. And she did that for a considerable amount of time, well over a year, working with captured soldiers. And she saved well over 200 soldiers from capture and helped them get back to the UK to either recover or then return to the army to carry on supporting and fighting in the war. One of those people that she helped is up there. His name's Sergeant Jesse Tunmore. And just by coincidence, he was in the Norfolk Regiment where she was born. And he wrote an account when he got back to Britain of what happened to him in the war. And I'm just going to read to you a couple of extracts from it, because I think it really brings to life his experience and the difference that Edith Cavell made to his life. He talked about his capture. He said, "The Germans were everywhere, firing from the top of the hills. Private White was hit, and while he lay helpless on the ground, 5 more shots were poured into him. I'd quickly taken cover, and I laid in a stream for some time with just my mouth penetrating the water as the soldiers looked for me." He goes on and he explains how he was captured. He talked about how 6 of those that were captured planned to break out. They climbed over a wall and dropped to freedom, but sadly they were caught quite quickly. And after one night in Woodland, they split into 3 pairs, they got to Brussels, and they got to Edith Cavell in her hospital. She was cool, calm, and astute. She was the matron at the hospital, and she did a great deal to help us. We arrived on the 23rd of September 1914, and Nurse Cavell fed and housed us for a few days. She took small photographs of Lewis and myself, and eventually procured a certificate of identity for us both. There's one of those documents that she made there. It's a false identity document. And she used those artistic skills that she practiced as a young person to create these false documents that the captured soldiers could use and take as they travelled through Europe trying to get back to Britain. And for many, many people it worked. He said we travelled by covered wagon, but to Antwerp we got to Brussels, but we were captured again. We went back to the hospital and Nurse Cavell helped us again. This time we made a plan to escape on foot. Nurse Cavell gave us some money and helped us bribe some officials so we could travel out on a barge, and we slipped away on a small boat. We travelled by train to Rotterdam, put us safely on a boat to England. And that's the account of one of the soldiers, and he ends it by saying, "I'm one of the many grateful soldiers that Nurse Cavell helped." And she helped well over 200 soldiers who were captured to get away and get back to their freedom, and some of them to carry on the fight, which was incredibly brave and at great risk to herself. This carried on for a long time until the Germans found out and she was captured. And that picture there is the cell that Nurse Cavell was placed in for a long period of time. This nurse that had devoted her life to helping people and nursing them and supporting them was placed and imprisoned and interrogated, and she eventually admitted that she had helped over 200 servicemen to escape. She was sentenced to death, and she had some time in this cell, but the time went very quickly, and eventually she was executed by firing squad. And that's a nurse that has devoted her life to helping people get better. And that caused outrage in England, absolute outrage. People were saying, the public was saying, how can this happen? How can someone like that be treated like that? And the press and the government, there were posters everywhere where they were saying she's been murdered. She was buried, like many soldiers in the First World War, in a simple grave. But the press went a bit crazy, really. They had these posters out. They're saying she's been murdered, this is outrageous. And they used this, the government, to encourage more people to enlist in the army, to join up and fight. And because of the outrage and the feeling that people had that this was wrong, the numbers of people that enlisted went up by 5 times over this period. And actually the execution or murder of Nurse Edith Cavell is one of the reasons why the Americans finally decided to join in the First World War and to support. There were postcards, there were monuments that went out to celebrate and recognise the work that Edith Cavell did as a nurse and as someone to save those soldiers. And that monument on the right is in Brussels, and that's devoted entirely to her. She knew the risks, she took the risks, and she was determined to help and do what she felt was the right thing. They found a diary in her cell after she'd been executed. She'd written many things, and you can read many of that, but here's an extract of it. I think one of the most moving things that she said near the end, when she knew she was going to die, was that she wanted to be a patriot. She loved her country and wanted to help her country. But she said, I realised that patriotism is not enough. I must have no hatred or bitterness toward anyone. And she meant to the Germans, to anyone who was involved. And she'd very much moved on, a bit like the Red Cross. She recognised she was there to help people, whatever side they were on. Now, the public were outraged, as I mentioned. And just like nowadays, people who can't do something themselves often want to give money to help. And a lot of money was donated by the public. Many hundreds of thousands of pounds were put forward. And it was used to create this organisation, the Cavill Nurses Trust. And that was set up to support a particular group of people, to support healthcare assistants, nurses, midwives, those people that care and support in the area that Edith Cavell supported him. And that trust, that charity, is still operating today. This family, the Chapel family, were very much affected when Mary Chapel, on the left there, developed a brain tumour. She got poorly, she couldn't work, and it had a significant effect on the family. The Cavill Nurses Trust helped them with money and also with support and advice. And they helped them in a very difficult time when the whole family could have exploded when things had gone wrong. But they didn't. And the Cavill Nurses Trust still continues to work today, supporting people in those professions. And personally, I think that's a wonderful legacy for Edith Cavell, that even though 152 years have gone by since she was born, her legacy still stands, and she is in some way still helping many people. And this all began from that young girl on the right, born in this country, who said in her diary, I'm going to do something to help people, something for people. And that's why I think it's important that we know who Edith Cavell was and how she still helps people today. And I want you to think about, what will you do? What difference will you make in your life as we're at the beginning of this year? Thank you for listening. We're going to remain facing the front. I'm going to ask tutors to start to dismiss people from the front. Have a good day.